Yirmiyahu was a prophet, was a good chaver of mine. Never understood a single word he said, but we helped him to drink his yain. And we always have some mighty fine yain. Singing Simchat Le'olam. Kol ha'yeladim now. Simchat to the dagim in the deep blue sea. Simchat to you and me. Yeah.
Welcome to the Haftarah Plethora video podcast, where we might not bring joy to the world, but we do talk about prophets like Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Ezekiel. And once again, we're back to the League of Minor Prophets this week. 2 weeks ago, we read from Hosea, and this week, we're reading from Zechariah. I'm Larry Herman, sipping some very fine wine and talking Haftarah to my good chaver, Rick Muller, a.k.a. the King of Cannellation. And here are the latest pictures of my granddaughter, Millie Rose, a.k.a. Amalia Vered, who's got a great big goofy smile and then gets a goofy face from her father, Aaron.
I can see that she's your pride and joy.
Yep.
But wait a second. That's not a picture of Millie. Who are those guys?
Oh, how did that get in there? Those are my camping buddies. We went to the desert for some jeeping. That's why I wasn't around last week for the Haftarah Plethora.
I can see your face peeking through behind Larry Harris. Glad you had a good time.
Yep, that's Larry Harris. He was with me too, or I was with him. Rick, do you remember?
Do I remember what?
Good question. But do you think that God remembers?
Do I think God remembers what?
Right. When we ask if you remember, we're usually talking about something specific. But the name of this week's prophet is Zechariah, which in Hebrew can be read as Zecher or Zechar, Yah, which translates as God remembers. So I guess the question is, what did God remember?
Well, I suppose that God remembered the people in this context.
And I think that you'd be correct. Zechariah lived in the land of Israel during the early days of the return from exile. He was a contemporary of Ezra the scribe and of the prophet Haggai. He was mainly interested in the reestablishment of the priesthood and the temple service.
Makes sense, since this week's Haftarah deals with Jerusalem, the site of the temple, the high priest Joshua, and the menorah.
All true. And that's the way that we're going to divide up the chanting this week. All of these are things that God remembers and wants to ensure are brought back to the people. In the last 4 verses of chapter 2, when we start, Zechariah explains that God will dwell in the midst of fair Zion, in Judah, in Jerusalem. Then in chapter 3, the angel of God defends the high priest Joshua, even though Joshua was clothed in filthy garments.
You know how I like angels.
I do, Rick. So the angel explains how the priests must walk in the paths of God and keep his commandments, and that by doing so, they will enable the coming of the Messiah. The phrase, Ki hineni mevi et avdi tzemach, I am about to bring my servant the branch, is perhaps the source of the 15th blessing of the daily Amida, which reads, Et tzemach David avdecha mehera tatzmiach, speedily cause the branch of David to flourish.
So we've got the land and the priesthood. What else?
More angel. In the beginning of chapter 4, the angel is giving Zechariah an image of the menorah and other furnishings of the temple. But Zechariah doesn't know what's their purpose. So the angel explains, using one of the most famous of all biblical verses, Lo b'chayil v'lo b'koach ki im bruchi amar Adonai tzivaot.
Which is not by might and not by power, but by spirit alone shall we all live in peace. The latest version of Debbie Friedman's song, Zichrona Livracha. She wrote a song using that verse.
She did indeed. Famous. Or famously, I should say.
Mm-hmm. So what does it mean in this context?
The angel is telling Zechariah to tell Zerubbabel, who is the civic authority appointed by the Persians to rule Judah, that the rebuilding of the temple requires obedience to God and God's commandments, and not just might.
So if the people came back from the land, the priests resume their duties, and the temple service is restored as commanded. All will be well.
That about sums it up, Rick. A pretty happy message all in all.
Well, I've got trope news for you too. Not only is the message a good one, but the trope are spectacular. I get to chant two rare trope. The Merchat Kefula in chapter 3, verse 2. And then there's a Pazer, the rarest of them all, though Kefula is pretty rare, in chapter 4, verse 2. Not to mention a bunch of other great trope. There's 7 Zakef Gadols, but I'll explain them just before I chant. So how about if we get started?
Sounds great. Let me just add one more note. This Haftarah is also read on the first Shabbat of Hanukkah. Can you guess why?
Because it talks about the menorah, duh.
You got it. That was an easy one. Okay, so we'll divide the reading by chapter. The text is found in the Eitz Chaim on page 837. We'll start with chapter 2, verses 14 through 17, which talk about the return to the land. Then we'll read chapter 3 in its entirety, which deals with Joshua the high priest. And finally, the first 7 verses of chapter 4, dealing with the menorah and our Debbie Friedman song.
Okay, so before I do the first part, the Zakef Gadol there in the middle shouts out to me, V'yada'at. The translation is, then you will know. So what will we know? What do we really know? What is reality? That's what I'd like to say about that. And if
that's
you link,
that's in verse 15.
15, yeah.
And what we'll know is that Adonai Tzevaot Shalachani Elecha. He sent me to you.
Right. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Kamatz katan on the first word there. Roni v'simchi batzion ki hineni va v'shachanti b'tochech neum Adonai v'nilvu goyim Rabim el Adonai bayohom hahu v'hayuli le'am v'shachanti v'tochech v'yada'at ki Adonai tzvaot shlachani elayich v'nachal Adonai et Yehuda chelko al Admat HaKodesh Uvachar Od B'Yerushalayim Has Kol Basar Mipnei Adonai Ki Neor Mimon Kodsho.
You know, Rick, I've really gotten to appreciate the Zakef Gadol, especially the way in which you do it.
Thanks.
And I know that we got a bunch of them. We got 3 of them in the next chapter.
Yes. So the next piece, if you link them together, and I'll get to the Merchat Kefula in a sec, but if you link them together, Omeid in the first verse of chapter 3, standing there, then Vihoshua, he's the person in this story standing there, but picture yourself, I'm picturing myself standing before God at the end of days, as it were, and Va'omar in verse 5, what would you say? He said to him, the angel says to you, so what would the angel say to you if you were standing there? So I like those 3 linked together like that. It's probably all in my head, but that's the way it is. And then verse 2, the Merchat Kefula on the word Zeh takes a very unimportant word. It just means this, but puts a really rare trope on it. Aharon ben Asher did, or the tradition did before him, to highlight the word this. This is the brand that's plucked from the fire. This is the saving remnant. And halo before that, with the dargah, behold, I'm going to sing it Mercha Kefula. I do two Tavirs. I've heard other variations of it. But one more thing on the word Zeh. In the story of Noah, when he's announced that he's going to be the one to save the world, Zeh there has two trope on the same word, which is really rare. It's in Genesis. And then when Moses is a baby in the basket and the daughter of Pharaoh finds him, he's a Zeh sitting there in the basket, whether he's crying or not, before or after the angel hit him to make him more pathetic to the Pharaoh's daughter. But it also was taking an unimportant word and making an importance out of it. So here, Zerubbabel or Yehoshua or just any person standing before God in this situation is like, well, we're common. There's nothing to us, but we can have real importance depending on what we do. Would be my sermon on that.
That's fantastic. You practically have the entire Torah memorized, or the Tanakh memorized.
Just those three Z's, please. Yeah.
All right. But I just want to. It's a great point. I want to point out the context of that verse, because there is an accuser. I guess the accuser would be like the Satan.
Yeah, he's the accusing attorney angel, the prosecuting attorney.
Right. He's accusing the priest who's dressed in Joshua, who's dressed in all these dilapidated clothes, and basically the defending angel is basically saying,
spruces him up. He gives him good new clothes. He spruces him up.
But before that, he says, "Look, this is the brand. This is the tzemach who's plucked from the fire. So it's plucked from the fire. It's kind of burnt up, disheveled, but it's in fact going to be related to the branch of David."
Yes. Yes. Okay.
I'm all ready.
Me too. Vayar Eni et Yehoshua HaKohen HaGadol Omer Lifnei Malach Adonai V'Hasatan Omer Al Yemino Lesitno Vayomer Adonai El HaSatan Yigar Adonai Becha HaSatan Ve'yigar Adonai Becha Abocher Yerushalayim Halo Zeh Ud Mutzal Me'esh V'Yehoshua Haya Lavush Begadim Tzoim Ve'omed Lifnei HaMalach Vaya'an Vayomer El Ha'omdim Lefanav Lemor Hasiru Habegadim Hatzoim Me'alav Vayomer Elav Re'eh He'evarti Me'alecha Avonecha V'halbesh Odcha Machalatzot V'omar Yasimu Tzanif Tahor Arosho V'yasimu Atzanif HaTahor Arosho V'yabishuhu Begadim U'malach Adonai Omed Vaya'ad Malach Adonai Yehoshua Lemor Koamar, a pronouncement. This is what he's going to say, a Ger Shaim. That happens a lot. See verse 8, same thing. Adonai Tzvaot Im bidrachai telech V'im et mishmarti tishmor V'gam ata tadin et beiti V'gam tishmor chatzerai V'natati lecha malachim ben ha'omdim ha'ela Shmana, listen up, Yoshua HaKohen HaGadol Ata v're'echa hayoshvim lefanecha, ki anshe mofet hema, ki hineni mevi et avdi tzemach, ki hine ha'evan asher natati lifnei Yoshua al even achat shiva einayim hineni mefateach pituchach neum Adonai tzvaot umashti et avon haaretz hahi beyom echad bayom hahu neum Adonai tzvaot tikreu ish l're'ehu el tachat gefen ve'el tachat te'ena.
Wow, I just love that, Rick. I love the Gershaim. I love the Karma v'Azlaz in there, and we didn't actually talk, and I have nothing to add about about both the crown that's placed on the head, but also on the Even Achat Shiva Einayim. So the rock with 7 eyes.
Yes, 7 facets, I guess that means. I don't know.
Well,
something like that.
Translation here is 7 eyes, but we'll leave that for next year to try to find a meaning for that.
Okay, challenge the audience to come up with something.
But I know you're going to have something to say about that pazer in the 2nd verse of chapter 4.
Yes.
But I just want to mention, I see that that's also got a little bracket among it, that we read it differently than it's actually written.
Yes. In the Eitz Chaim, the print is small. Vayomer, apparently there was a yud in the original text, but the rabbis don't want us to pronounce that like Vayomer or Vayomar. They want us to say Vaomar, and I answered instead of and he answered. So it's I guess it's obvious in the story. The angel is talking to Zerubbabel, and Vayashov the Zakef Gadol with a Kamatz Katan there. Vayashov, it becomes Kamatz Katan. Vayireni, he woke me up as a man woken from sleep. Again, my image is being wakened up from death, and your spirit goes up to heaven. And what will the conversation be like with the angel then? And the angel asks him, "What do you see?" Ma'ata roeh, and then he answers with a pazer. So it's a really intense moment, and he sees a lampstand. Okay, but that was his emphasis. This Zerubbabel. Oh well, he puts it into it's Zerubbabel, right? Not Yehoshua at this point. So
right.
So his emphasis is the menorah. Okay, and then the dialogue intensifies. Verse 4 starts with I answered, and verse 5 starts with he answered with a Talisha Gedolah. Then verse 6 is an Azla Gerish, and he answered. So the dialogue going back and forth is emotional, would be my interpretation. And then there's a Yativ on Zeh, again, that insignificant word. This is the word of God, so it becomes really significant. And here's your Lo V'chayo V'lo V'koach that Debbie wrote about. And then more fireworks at the end, verse 7, the Dargat Severe. Who are you? The translation doesn't do it justice. Mi'ata means who are you? Not whoever you are, but I don't know. To me, it's just simple. Who are you? What kind of person are you going up to this Har HaGadol? But then it ends with the last Kef Gadol, shouts, Teshuot, shouts of beautiful, beautiful, like the ending of a movie and the credits come up. So I really like the way it builds like that.
You know, Alter actually translates it as, what are you, great mountain? Before
talking to the mountain? Oh, yeah. I get it as talking to the person.
I thought so too.
Yeah. Could be either way, I suppose. But I don't know what they're talking on the mountain for.
A pretty powerful 7 verses to close the Haftarah, don't you think?
Yes, sir. Ready?
I'm all ready. I'm ready and anxious to hear you chanting.
Vayashov hamalach hadover bi vayireni keish asher yeor mishnato vayohomer elai ma'ata roeh va'omar ra'iti v'hinei menorat Zahav kulach, the gold, Begulach aroshach, Veshiva neroteha aleha, Shiva veshiva mutzakot, La nerot asher aroshach, Ushnaim zeitim aleha, Echad mimin hagula, Ve'echad al smolach, Va'an va'omar el hamalach adover bi lemor ma'ele adoni vayan. It should be on the yud, not on the vav. Amalach, the angel gets emphasis. Adover bi vayohomer elai halo yadata Mahema ele va'omar lo adoni vaya'an vayomer elai lemor ze devar Adonai el Zerubbabel lemor lo v'chayil v'lo v'choach ki im bruchi Amar Adonai Tzvaot Miata Har Hagadol Lifnei Zerubbabel L'mishor V'hotzi Et ha'even ha'rosha Shuot Chen Lach.
Beautiful, beautiful. Chen. Rick, the trope just really adds so much to this Haftarah.
Yeah.
There's just so much there. We could go on and on. I just want to mention one thing in that verse, second verse, the 3-time repetition of Shiva in that verse we didn't talk about, and the connection between the 7 branches of menorah and the 7 eyes of the stone are something we're going to have to come back to either on the first day, the first Shabbat of Hanukkah, or next year on Parshat Beha'alotcha.
Yeah, we'll do it at Hanukkah.
In any case, this has been great as usual. Rick, I love when you give the commentary right in the middle of your chanting. It's fantastic.
Thanks.
We want to give thanks to our technical advisor, our humor consultant, and our polywagamist, Norm Gar. And don't forget to write us with your thoughts and comments. Our emails are below. We wish you all a Shabbat Shalom and a happy Memorial Day.
Have a great weekend.
Happy weekend. Shabbat Shalom.